All right, today we're going to tackle a really interesting multi-part question from a recent AQA GCSE chemistry paper. We're going to deconstruct it piece by piece using the official mark scheme to show you exactly how to build that perfect answer. Let's dive right in.
So, here's our game plan. First, we'll get a handle on what question 6 is all about. Then, we're going to hit each part in order. First, using data to figure out a reactivity series, then designing a proper experiment, and finally, recalling some key info on fuel cells. By the end, you'll see exactly how it all clicks together. You know, question 6 is just a perfect example of how these exams test way more than just what you can memorize. It's a blend of data analysis, planning a practical, and your core subject knowledge all rolled into one. It's a challenge, for sure, but it's one we're going to absolutely nail. Okay, so this right here, this is the heart of the entire question. What you're looking at is the chemical cell they used. See, you've got two different metal electrodes. One is always nickel, by the way, and they're dipped into an electrolyte, which in this case is a sodium chloride solution. Then you've got a voltmeter hooked up to measure the voltage it produces. This simple setup is the key to everything that comes next. Okay, let's jump into the first part of the question. This bit is all about looking at a table of results and figuring out what the numbers are really telling us about how reactive these different metals are. So here's the actual question, and it's worth 3 marks. Now notice it has 2 parts. First, you've got to list the metals in order of reactivity. Second, you have to justify your answer. To get all 3 marks, you have to do both. And trust me, so many people forget that justification and lose a super easy mark. Don't let that be you. Now, what's really cool is that this table contains all the evidence you need. It's showing you the voltage you get when different metals are paired up with that nickel electrode. So the big question is, how do we turn these voltage numbers into an order of reactivity? So here's the golden rule, and you've got to remember this. The higher the positive voltage, the more reactive the metal is compared to our reference, nickel. So if we look at the data, magnesium is way up at 2.12 volts. That makes it the most reactive. Zinc is next with 0.51. Nickel against itself, well, that's going to be 0, right? Makes perfect sense. Then we dip into the negatives for the less reactive metals. Copper is at minus 0.59, and silver is the most negative at minus 1.05, making it the least reactive of the bunch. And just like that, there's your order. And this is how you lock in that final justification mark. This slide is basically the cheat sheet. These are the exact phrases the AQA mark scheme is looking for. You only need one of them. You could say, the higher the positive voltage, the more reactive the metal, or the least reactive metal has the most negative voltage. It just goes to show how being precise with your language gets you every single point. Okay, moving on to the big one. This is a 6-mark question all about experimental design. This is your chance to really put on your scientist hat and plan a proper, valid investigation from scratch. So the question wants a plan to investigate how voltage changes when you change the concentration of the electrolyte. That means concentration is your independent variable. That's the thing you change. And voltage is your dependent variable. That's the thing you measure. To get those top marks, you need a method that's clear, logical, and just makes sense step by step. So what does a top-level method actually look like? Well, we can break it down. You'd kick things off by setting up the cell, just like in the diagram. You choose 2 different metals for your electrodes and measure the voltage. Then, the really crucial part is to repeat this measurement but with different concentrations of that sodium chloride solution. And how do you do that? By diluting a stock solution with measured amounts of water. Simple. But here's the thing that separates a good answer from a great one and gets you into that 5 or 6 mark territory. You absolutely must talk about your control variables. What are you keeping the same to make it a fair test? Well, you have to use the same 2 metals every single time. You should also use the same total volume of electrolyte for each test. And for bonus points, mentioning specific equipment like a pipette or a burette shows you're really thinking about accuracy. All right, for the final part of this question, we're shifting gears a little bit. We're moving away from our simple lab cell and onto a really important real-world application of this chemistry, the hydrogen fuel cell. And here's the question. 2 marks, and it's asking you to describe how a hydrogen fuel cell actually works to create a voltage. This is a pretty straightforward knowledge recall question. 2 marks means the examiner is looking for 2 distinct correct points. So let's look at exactly what gets you the points, and this is straight from the examiner's mark scheme. For mark number 1, you need to say that hydrogen is oxidized. They'd also accept hydrogen loses electrons, which, is the definition of oxidation. For the second mark, you just need to say what the product is. In this reaction, it's just water. So put it together, hydrogen is oxidized to produce water. 2 simple points, 2 marks in the back. Okay, let's take a step back and see what we've just accomplished. By working through this one question, we've actually covered a massive range of chemistry skills. Let's just quickly recap what you've shown you can do. See, this question wasn't just a memory test. In the first part, you were using AO3 skills. That's all about interpreting data. In part 2, you used even more AO3 skills by designing a whole scientific investigation. And in the final part, you switched to AO1, which is your ability to just recall and apply what you know. It's a brilliant example of how they weave different skills into a single question. So why does any of this matter outside the exam hall? Well, this fundamental chemistry is behind the batteries in your phone, it's how we stop giant ships from rusting in the ocean, and it's at the very heart of developing clean energy, like hydrogen fuel cells. The principles you've just been working with are literally shaping the world around us. Which really just leaves one question. What are we going to build with them next?